Hi class. This summer's been kind of a disappointment to me because I missed the Fibonacci conference. I heard it was better than the previous two put together. Yeah, best app ever. I also missed saying Happy Father's Day to you who are fathers. As you know, I have a lot of grandkids, all from one daughter. And I told her it was kind of dangerous to have any more grandkids after 39. I mean, aren't 39 enough? Anyway, I wanted to wrap up one point where I thought I probably should have done a better job reviewing it with you. And this is the idea of variable reduction. That when you have this big space with a lot of variables, how can I make this problem simpler that I can solve? And so one solution to this was called the 5 whys, which is a technique I don't particularly like, and you're going to see why. Get it? See why? What we're really trying to do is root cause analysis. And we need to find what is the real reason why this is going on. Otherwise, are you fighting the disease, or are you just taking care of symptoms? And so the whole idea is to deal with the root cause so problems don't keep popping up. For those of you who are engineers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, how many times does somebody not do a good job solving a problem, and then 6 or 8 months later, you're dealing with it again? This is one thing I'm constantly fighting with my management of companies I worked with, and that's that I said, look, I'm not in favor of band-aiding. If we band-aid this problem, we're just going to have to fight it again in 8 months. Let's just do it right the first time and not have to worry about it. Solve what needs to be solved. You also have focus. Instead of working on a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't matter, focus on what really does matter. Especially in a startup, you have limited resources. The idea of the 5 whys is a way to find the root cause or core reason is just keep asking why. Yes. But why? But why? And by asking these whys, you can get to the core of the problem. Now, this is an example of using the 5 whys when they were trying to figure out why the Washington Monument was deteriorating. And as it turns out, it has to do with the lights. And so this is something you wouldn't come up with, and this is why everybody thought the 5 whys was wonderful. Here's my problem with the 5 whys. What if your problem is very complex like this? The 5 whys is basically a linear thinking, where one why leads to another why, leads to this, this, and this. The problem is you've got one solution out of 100 possibilities. You miss most of the solution space. And that's why I don't like the 5 whys. What I like is look at your problems as space. Look at all the details, see how it all trades off, and then start getting rid of variables. Now, in order to get rid of a variable, you could do it by one of 2 ways. You can eliminate it, or you can define it. If you define it, it's no longer a variable. But what's happened is you've shrunk the space, and so the problem's easier to deal with. And if you remember from the lecture on the groove, that's what variable reduction is about. If I can see this much of the problem and realize that these 2 main arteries don't work, then I can eliminate this whole problem instead of having to go through all of this. Now let me give you an example of where the 5 whys failed. And microsensors, and if you look at the scale here, this is 2 microns, so this is about 4 microns across, and this gap here is maybe a half micron. And what happens is when you have a mechanical structure, whether it's suspended like a cantilever, maybe it's a whole area, bending membrane, or maybe it's just 2 connected ends, a bridge. What ends up happening is when these things move, you can measure how much it moves by, and that's what a sensor is. For example, accelerometers tend to be cantilevers, and that's when we have acceleration, the mass will move. Now, here's the problem. When you process this stuff, the last step is a fluid step. And so when you rinse this whole thing in water, what happens? Well, as it starts to dry, it starts to pull down this free cantilever. And then when it finally dries all the way out, it sticks together. And so this is what's referred to as stiction. So one approach of solving this problem is the 5 whys. Why is this thing pulling down? It's the capillary force as it dries out. It causes the cantilever to connect. But why? It's because surface atoms adhere. But why? Because those surface atoms are actually bonding. You can't get that stiction like that unless there's something that's connecting to those surface atoms. But why? And it's this water residue is acting like a glue that's holding this all down. But why? There's probably hydrocarbon contaminants that's forming the leaks. So, surface chemistry is what we need to go after. First, tried alcohols, and that's if these evaporate very quickly, maybe they'll release more easily. And that ended up failing. And so the second approach was play with the process parameters, put up a really high temperature so when it dries it'll just kind of like explode. And so you get rapid evaporation freeing it. Yeah, that didn't fail either. So the third approach they tried, and this was touted by Berkeley, is using this diamond-like substance to use for fluid release. And we got a sample of it, and the thing failed like crazy. I mean, all it did was, it kind of like had to like grease on the surface. It was a mess. However, what if we looked at the space and understood what is the crux of this problem? What the space is, telling you why this happens. Stiction is bonding force times area minus restoring force. Meaning, is there a force to pull it back up? If it's higher than the stiction force, then it'll release okay. Bond force is a function of chemistry. In general, I try to avoid chemistry because if you have to make a new material or something like that, now you're talking about years and untold headaches. I've been through developing new materials. It's not fun. It's very difficult, and there's a lot more science to it. I mean, a lot less science to it than art. The restoring force is about making it stiffer, but the problem is to make it too stiff, then it won't bend, and it's this amount of bending that determines the sensitivity of a sensor. However, you might be able to do some things to improve it, because restoring force is a fourth power of edge length. So a little change in edge length, you get a lot more power. Also, changing the thickness is cubed. So there are exponential terms in here that you can play with. Area, the last variable, is a function of design. This is something we control. This is something we can mess with. So what other solutions were there other than this grease? Well, one were cylinders, and that's that I can reduce the area instead of these fully coming in contact, just little points. And the thing about the location of these cylinders is they're put in such a way that instead of having a large area bending membrane, if I put one in the center, all of a sudden now it's going to be like 0.7 of the length. And so 70%, raise that to the fourth power, all of a sudden I pick up quite a bit of amount of force. And so that's one approach, using cylinders. Or you can even reduce the area more, and that's use spikes. Now both have to have a lithography step, but if I have teeny weeny spikes, then what happens is my area starts approaching zero, and so I get very little stiction. Third approach is just roughen the surface. Instead of having two smooth surfaces contact each other, roughen up one of them. So you just use a little chemistry to roughen the surface. So it's a simple process step. And as it turns out, all three approaches worked. Berkeley spent a year on that grease. I spent 1 week reducing the area. And why? Because they looked at the problem and they jumped on the first thing that they saw and thought of. Or they used the 5 whys and they were thinking this was only a chemistry solution. But if I look at the whole space and do variable reduction, what happens? You have a much simpler problem to work with. This is why in your problem solving, I'm always saying, what's the crux? What's the crux? What's the one or two things that everything drives off of? How do I define space? And this goes back to the Asimov paper. In order to figure out space, the best way to do it is brainstorming. When you have hard problems like this, get a whole bunch of people together and just have a discussion. Start putting sticky labels on blackboards and stuff like that. Some people just use software. There's software that does these things now. But get every last idea around. And what always happens is you talk about it and then you start to get tired of talking about it. You've pretty much exhausted every last idea, people playing off each other. And now this is where you come in as a leader. And that's through the process, you have to keep the people focused. I mean, people go off on tangents too easily. But take a step back and look at what you have. And what you start to see are patterns. This is the basis of all AI. Look at the pattern, look at what the central theme's supposed to be. And so that gives you your crux. And then from that, you can shape the plan moving forward. That's how you get space. Now, in terms of your homework, you had two problems to think about. One was about the battery, and one was about climate change destroying houses. Well, the first thing to do to look at that problem is, okay, if I have more power for less volume, what is the implication of that? And so in this case, it means if I have less volume with more power, it means that any application that exists right now, I can start getting more power out of a battery for the same amount of volume and weight. And as you can imagine, all of a sudden now you're talking about an electric car that's got 10 times more capacity. All of a sudden now you're talking about thousands of miles. Yeah, the battery thing I just made up. But it's the idea. Also, in terms of price, well, this is something new and novel. I can charge more. But what it comes down to is if you set a price range right away, you've just eliminated one variable. And this is what I was looking for you to do. List out a bunch of variables and look at which ones do I get rid of and which ones I should focus on. Now, the weather problem about people losing their houses, and it's not just floods or hurricanes, it's also fires. And so right now in the United States, we're having so much extreme weather. A lot of people are losing their homes. And here's the problem. Insurance companies, what do? They just stop insuring. I own a cabin in northern Arizona, and we got hit by a fire. And let me tell you, that had me stressed out. Not so much that my cabin will get wiped out, because I'm insured. I'll just have it rebuilt. The problem is that fire will turn my property into a cinder, and that's what I didn't want to happen. Fortunately, it got close. It got within a mile of my home. But what ended up happening is that a bunch of insurers started dropping insurance left and right up there. And so now insurance has gotten pretty expensive because so few people want to insure the area. And so this is a real problem. And the insurance companies aren't offering a solution. A lot of you had the right idea. The idea behind insurance is that you have a lot of people paying into a pool. And so when somebody gets in trouble, you pay for it. Okay, those idiots who say, well, only insurance should be, voluntary. Here's a problem with voluntary insurance. The people who are low risk aren't going to buy the insurance, and the people who are high risk are going to buy the insurance. And what happens is you don't have any relief from cost, and then insurance just goes sky high, and then that's the end of insurance. It takes away the whole thing. And now you're back to the problem of people can't cover themselves. And so considering this is a national problem, the bigger pool of insurance, the bigger pool you have to draw from, and that reduces the cost for everyone. And so maybe we need a national emergency insurance. Yeah, I know the last thing you want is another tax. But it can work in the same way that Medicare works. What people don't understand is that Medicare only covers about 75 to 80% of all your costs. Well, if you have $1 million cost, who's going to cover the other 200,000? And this is why people buy supplemental insurance. But the thing is, the government, the Medicare system you paid into, takes care of 80% of your needs. But the other 20% that you get from private insurance, now it's very, very much cheaper because Medicare is covering 80% of it. And that's the kind of system you need for this. But the whole idea, the crux of this is understanding, okay, who can afford to pay for all this? Because this is why private insurers won't do it. It's too big a chunk of change. So that was what I was looking for on that answer. Well, we're coming to the end of class. Yes, we're a little bit more than a week away. Your final project, I'm not going to grade you on the idea. I'm going to grade you on the process. Meaning, look at the ideas that we've gone through, whether it's variable reduction or whatever. And as long as the mental process makes sense of how you came up with this idea, remember, to find ideas, go bigger or go smaller. All of these play into it, and that's what you're going to get graded on. This is in the finale video, and for those of you who had me in other classes, you know I totally detest student review time. Just because I believe it's my job as a professor to make you uncomfortable, to push you, and unfortunately that doesn't lend itself to good student reviews. I come to the conclusion MIT was teaching nirvana. And the reason why is we never complained about professors. Why? Because if you complain, this professor would boot you out of his class. Then you go complain to the administration. Their attitude is, hey, you don't like it? Leave. There's 100 guys who want to take your place. So it's like, yeah, I'll keep my mouth shut. But anyway, these things really do matter. And it actually matters a lot for this course because I'm doing some experimental things in here. So if you like it, please say so. If you don't like it, please say so, because that's how courses get better. And I know this online format, it really isn't very conducive for this class. The last thing I'll note is amnesty. Amnesty is next Monday, meaning for those of you who have missed assignments, get it in by next Monday and I'll only take 10% off. I could give you a 0. But my basic attitude is, I could give you a 0, but did you learn anything? No. Please get it in. I mean, even get a 50 on it. And the reason why is, if you get a 0, it really does hell to your grade. And I want things to work out for you. Anyway, I'll leave you with this last thought. We live in an age where, prices keep going up and everything else. And even if you take your car in to fill up for gas, I mean, air will cost you $1. And so you think, air's $1? And all I can say is, that's inflation. Okay, if you have any questions, just let me know.